Okay, I'm ready.
Looks good.
2 days slides. We're going to take a look at the Grant presidency. This is his second term beginning, first the election. And we're going to take a look at his opponent, who was Horace Greeley. This is a graphic photograph of Greeley. It's 1872. We had photographs for over 30 years, roughly, but you can see he's another guy with chin whiskers. But he was a journalist, actually a newspaper owner, and he was the founder of the New York Tribune and had the support in the 1872 election of Southern Republicans and of some Northern Democrats. Mostly this was because of issues. Take a look at his policies. There's a total of four. He wanted amnesty for former Confederates. That got him lots of support in the South. No convictions, no charges, etc. Just bring them back in. He wanted low tariffs. This was very popular in the North. The reason that it was popular in the North is because there was a lot of manufacturing industry in the North. Low tariffs on imported manufacturing goods would aid those northern industries. But the agricultural South, it wasn't very good for them. So, uh, they wanted protection for other items and civil service, civil servant positions should be based on merit, not political appointees, people who would help you in the election. So it should be what you have a college degree and something that fits the department that you're going to be working in. And eventually, of course, it led to tests. Local governments, item 4, should be controlled by white people. Again, this is something that gave Greeley lots of support in the South. He was concerned about blacks. They weren't allowed to have an education. They couldn't read and write. How can we have them running government? Ulysses Grant in the 1872 election. Let's take a look at his very brief positions. He wanted rights for women, in particular voting. This happens in 1920, 58 years after the 1872 election. And second, he wanted federal government support for former slaves. In other words, let's set up schools, colleges, you are free to travel, etc. Also, notice this picture of Grant. Uh, he's got facial hair. Uh, Candidates and presidents all had facial hair through the 1800s, almost all of them. The last president to have facial hair was William Howard Taft. He was president 1909 to 1913. So we've had about 112 years of clean shaven folks. 1872 election results. First, Grant, popular vote. He had 3.6 million votes. Uh, that's about 55.6% of the popular vote. 286 electoral votes. Horace Greeley, who was considered to be a liberal Republican and a Democrat, he had 2.8 million votes, 43.8% of the vote. He won 45 votes, but none were cast for him. We'll look at that on the next slide. This is a landslide victory. It's 11.8%. Anything at 5% or higher is considered a landslide, so this is a big deal. Okay, how come Greeley didn't get any electoral votes in 1872? It's because 3 weeks after the November election, he died. Now, the Electoral College didn't meet until the next February, on February 12th of 1873. He's been dead for a couple of months, so we're not going to vote for him. So the people that were assigned to Greeley and to his electoral votes cast their votes for other people, totaling 4 different people. So these 45 votes intended for Greeley went to 4 other people. African Americans voted in this election. There were about 500,000 votes, quite a few. And the African Americans almost totally voted for Ulysses Grant, who was a giant supporter of their freedom, and they're bringing them into full citizenship. Let's take a look here at just kind of a historical thing and compare it to the present day. There were a total of 6,433,211 votes cast in this 1872 election. Now, the total population was 38,925,598. That means about 16.5% of the total population voted. Of course, probably half of those people weren't eligible to vote yet. They weren't of age, for instance, and women couldn't vote. Now, let's take a look at the 2024 election. There were 152,320,193 votes cast. Population was about 340,110,988. That's 44.8% of the entire population voted. Why such a greater percentage in voting? One thing is voting had been increased. Women could now vote. People 18 or older, not 21 or older, could vote. Also, it's a lot easier to get to a polling place. In 1872, almost everybody was a farmer of some sort. Getting off of the farm and into a town where there was a voting place was not an easy task and had to be done on horseback. And so a lot of people said, the heck with it, Today, how can we block voters? I mean, we were blocking them in the past by having voting places in town, and they're 10 miles outside of town on a farm, and that really wasn't an intentional block. It's just the way the technology was at the time. But today, what we can do is, say, in a black neighborhood, this has actually been done in southern states. In a black neighborhood, you put a single voting place. You don't have 10 of them, which would be more normal. You just have one. And you put it someplace on a street where there are no buses. And the nearest bus might stop 10 blocks away. So you're preventing voting by people who you don't want to see voting, such as blacks in the South. Grant presidency, 1873, he delivers an inaugural address. Major points of the inaugural address, we're going to talk about 3 of them. Equal treatment for all Americans. Now, to Grant, this meant not just blacks, meant women also. Item 2, equality in citizenship, rights for freed slaves. Grant was a huge supporter of Reconstruction, where you say blacks, we're going to reconstruct them We're going to make it so they can vote. We're going to make them into full citizens, etc. These are people who were slaves. They had never dressed in suits. And here they are now dressing as white people do. And item 3, we're going to reunite the North and South. We got to bring these states in the South down here back into the Union and form the United States of America back up again. And of course, the South didn't like that, many to the present day. Now that was his items in his inaugural address. Interesting little side note here about inaugural addresses. Both George Washington and John Adams went to Congress and they spoke before Congress, their inaugural addresses. Thomas Jefferson was a horrible speaker. He had quite a very noticeable stutter. He didn't speak basically in public. So he sent a written copy of his 2 inaugural addresses to Congress. And every president then, up until 1913, so over about 113 years here, they're sending their inaugural addresses to Congress in written form. That got changed in 1913. Woodrow Wilson won the 1912 election and presented his inaugural address to Congress. And that continues to the present day, 113 years later. Grant presidency, corporate and government corruption. After the Civil War, there was a tremendous growth in industries, in businesses, especially in the North where businesses and industries were located. The South was primarily agricultural. So this just becomes gigantic. I mean, what we'd had in the past was farmers, usually small farmers. Now we have people with tremendous amounts of wealth, and there was lots of corruption. And a lot of people say it continues to the present day. Elon Musk is the richest person in the world, and he spent 140 days advising Trump at the beginning of this second term, for instance. And you can look at the cabinet members or people who support politics in the United States, and you can see there's lots of business and laws got passed where, okay, everybody who contributes, we're going to publish your name and we're going to publish who you gave the money to. And that's required by law. Well, new organizations got founded whereby you contribute to the organization. Then the organization contributes to candidates, and that's how rich people get around having their names published nowadays. 3 issues where action was taken. First of 3, congressional investigations were called for in all government compartments. We want to look at these people. We want to see what they've been doing. Have you ever received any money from a corporation? Has any corporation ever called and wanted to talk to you? Did you talk with them? What did you comment on, etc.? 2 of 3, Grant trusted people. He said, hey, my appointees, I'm very supportive of them, but he said, I do have concerns for business interference. This is a continuation of item 2. Grant wanted reforms for civil servants. And civil servants, many were appointed by presidents or by heads of different government agencies. none of it really based on abilities. And so the first Civil Service Commission is created by Grant during his second term in office. Uh, and they instituted exams for civil servants. My father worked in the personnel department of the federal government, and he had to take a civil service exam, of course. This was in the 1950s, and he scored 98% on it. But there were people beating him who got 103 and 104%. Well, how's that happen? That's because if you're a veteran, they add 10 percentage points onto your score. So my father got a job, but he was outscored by people who got over 100% on the tests. So some people say it's not great to be having special considerations for other people. It ought to be based on the test alone. Item 3, two Grant cabinet members, his Secretary of the Treasury and the Attorney General, both were charged with accepting bribes. This is George H. Williams, who was Grant's Attorney General, and he resigned, but not because of any corruption on his part. It was his wife who had accepted bribes, the people bribing her, hoping that she could influence her husband. Item 3 continued. How many businessmen offering bribes were charged with a crime? Government officials accepting them were, but what about the people offering? There's a lot of talk today here in Minnesota about Waltz and the fraud of giving money to help children, and people said, "Hey, I helped 10,000 children, and they'd only helped 1,000." And why didn't the Democratic Party in power? This is the charges against them. Why didn't they do something about this? Interesting thing, and an argument I've never heard is Republicans aren't very likable of businesses being heavily regulated, but I haven't heard anybody say, golly, if the Democratic Party had been really moving in on these businesses that serve children, would the Republican Party have been saying that you shouldn't be doing so much regulation? Pay raises during the Grant administration. Grant signed a congressional bill, raised the pay, so Congress passed this. Grant signs it into law, raises the pay of Congress, federal employees, and the president himself. And actually, it didn't raise the pay of Congress members. What it did is it gave them a $4,000 bonus for the time they had served. You could have been there for 2 years. You could have been there for 3 years in Congress. You got $4,000. But that's a healthy sum of money in 1873. By inflation, it's $108,000 a year. So nice chunk of money. That's in 2025. Secondly, pay raises for federal employees. Can't even begin to talk about these because there's way too many, but many of the federal employees got minor pay raises. And then the president's salary, and that got doubled. The president had been making $25,000 a year. That's the equivalent in 2025 of $648,000 by inflation. His salary, or the president's salary, was doubled to $50,000 by inflation in 2025, that'd be $1.3 million for the presidency. Well, by inflation, 1873, salary should be 1.3 million. Current salary of the president is $400,000 a year. So that hasn't kept up with inflation. And it's about 1/3 of what the president's spending power was back in 1873. Citizens objected to these pay raises. They especially objected to Congress getting a $4,000 single payment. So part of the bill was reduced. The president's salary increase remained the same, however. Income tax. Well, income tax was not allowed by the United States Constitution until the 17th Amendment was passed, and it was sent to the states in 1912, and enough states approved it in 1913. So what's an income tax doing in the 1870s? Well, the Civil War had started. Lincoln said we need lots of money. I'm just going to say we're going to have an income tax. Now, it was only on people making more than, I think it was $3,000, a gigantic amount of money then. You know, it's $100,000 a year or something today. So Lincoln starts an income tax to help pay for the Civil War. Well, in the 1870s here, it still had not been stopped, even though the war had been over for about 7 years. So this was something left over from the Civil War. It was temporary, but had no ending date. So who collected the income tax? The government didn't collect it. Private corporations did. This also led to lots of corruption. We collected 400,000. Here's your 150,000, government. Also, there was a tax on goods, and this was legal, had been since the founding of the nation. Was one of the only ways, import taxes was another way, but taxing goods made in the United States, a second way, was the way that the federal government got money to pay for what it wanted to do, military in particular. Well, there were whiskey manufacturers in the United States, and this whiskey league in cahoots with federal government officials got to pay less taxes on their whiskey than other manufacturers of other products were paying. Whiskey Ring was eventually destroyed, and it was the United States government that did it. Many people were tried for crimes here of not paying their rightful tax on their products. There were over 100 convictions, a total of $3 million in fines. In 2025, by inflation, that's $79.4 million that was paid in fines. Grant, conclusion to his presidency. Grant administrators saw a tremendous amount, or his administrations saw an incredible amount of issues. We're going to take a look at a couple here. First, the Civil War was over, and it had been over for several years. However, it had a huge impact through the Grant presidency. There were a total of 700,000 deaths. That was 2% of the U.S. population at the time. Compare that to World War II, not World War II. Somebody wasn't watching. Anyhow, World War II, 420,000 deaths. That is 3/1000ths of 1% of the population at the time of World War II. compared to 2% of the population being killed during the Civil War. Another item here is the rise of corporations, tremendous increase in wealth, making money moved from farms to manufacturing, and that was primarily in the North. Now, the presidency's over for Grant, and he and his wife say, let's take a world tour. So they begin. And this world tour lasted 30 months. That's 2 years and 6 months. Now that's 30 months, 130 weeks, 912 days. And you can see here we get down to 78 million, almost 79 million seconds that they are gone from the United States. They toured the following areas: Mediterranean Sea, Germany, England, the Near East, Africa, North Africa in particular, India, China, and Japan. Let's take a look on a map. Number 1, the Mediterranean Sea, that's located here. Number 2, Germany. Number 3, England. Number 4, the Near East, this whole area over in here. Number 5, North Africa, Egypt in particular, lots of pyramids there to see and so on. Number 6, they went to India then, and number 7, into China, and number 8, Japan. And they got pretty tired after Japan and said, the heck with it. They headed straight back to the United States. They didn't do anything on Pacific Ocean islands. Here's the Mediterranean, where they spent 5 of the 30 months. Spain, France, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, lots of stuff to see and do in the Mediterranean area. They met with world leaders. This is Otto von Bismarck, who was the German leader. They met with Queen Victoria in England. In Italy, they met with Pope Leo XIII. Today we have Pope Leo XIV. Alexander II of Russia, they met with him. And this is Meiji, a Japanese diplomat that they met with. Grant's had a very accomplished journalist pictured here, John Russell Young, who accompanied them on this tour. And he wrote about what they were doing, what they were seeing, etc. And then he would get these things sent back to his newspaper. And of course, other newspapers across the country would pick up these articles. And at the end of the tour, John Russell Young, had these writings of his published in a 2-volume set. And here it is, Around the World with General Grant. These are original copies. It is still in print, and you can buy it in a number of versions from, paperback to hardcover. On Amazon, the price range is $11.70 to $42.97. And you can read all about the Grant World Tour. The biggest hit in these books and in the articles that Young wrote were descriptions of Chinese food. This stuff had never been heard of in the United States. We're in the late 1970s here. Today, in the Twin Cities alone, the Minneapolis, St. Paul, and its suburbs, there are 240, roughly 240 Asian restaurants. A lot of restaurants. Effects of the Grand Tour. Take a look at that. Well, they got tired, and as I stated, after Japan, they simply returned to the United States. They sailed directly home into San Francisco, and that's where their ship landed. Crowds were massive greeting them because they'd been reading about this tour for 2.5 years in their local newspapers. So Grant gave speeches to thousands of people that were gathered there then. Uh, so the crowds, they were due to the newspaper coverage. This is one of the first times that we see the effects of mass media. And in this case, it was printed newspapers. So the effects of mass media are beginning to be felt. Lots of criticism. Telephones came into use. Oh, they're ruining children. It's doing this and that. Then radio, then television, and people are getting a whole different kind of news and so on and so forth. Here's an article that was published in the New York Times during Grant's world tour. And this is when he and his wife were in Peking, China. Here's a photograph of them. And here's an article that was written about what was going on there. The tour showed the world that the United States was an emerging world power. Big leaders, every place Grant stopped, would meet with him. Tree planting in Japan, just kind of a fun thing. They each planted a tree in Nagasaki, Japan. Now, in 1942, during World War II, the Japanese cut these trees down because they needed that space for a dump site for World War II junk. And these trees, anyway, would have been destroyed in 1945 with the atomic bomb, the second atomic bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. Here is a picture of the area. Here are the trees, the two trees that were planted by the Grants. No longer exist. They got rid of them in 1942. And this is a 1910 photo. Here's a remark by Grant concerning the planting, and I'm going to read it. At the request of the governor, Utsumi Togatsu, Mrs. Grant and I have each planted a tree in the Nagasaki Park. I hope that both trees may prosper, grow large, live long, and in their growth, prosper and long life be emblematic of the future of Japan. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen. They lasted 73 years. A two-term limit challenged. Grant's back in the United States. He's getting interested in another term. So Grant did 2 terms, then he stepped aside. This was the standard that had been set by George Washington. Okay, the world tour. Grant got lots of attention. It was very positive attention, very interesting stuff to read about, what was going on in other countries and what the Grants were seeing and so on. Leading Republican political figures mentioned him. They said, you were well known as a president, and you were well known before that as a general in the Northern Army. Now you've taken this world tour, covered in newspapers, so run for president. Well, 1880, he's considered for a 3rd term. The Republican convention is being held in Chicago, Illinois. The photograph here is a picture of that convention. Grant was interested. He wanted a 3rd term, but he said nothing publicly about it. Didn't publish anything in newspapers about it, just kept quiet and had other people working for him. Here is the first ballot at the Republican convention. Now, you need a majority to win. That's 50% plus 1 vote. Grant had 304 votes, 44.6%. James Blaine, who was campaign slogan for Blaine. At one time, he did get the Republican nomination, but not in 1880. It was Blaine, James G. Blaine, Continental Liar from the state of Maine. That was the the crying shout used by Democrats when Blaine was nominated. He got 284, just 20 votes less than Grant. That was 41.8%. Then William Tecumseh Sherman, the famous Civil War general, he got 93 votes on the first ballot at the Republican convention, 13.6%. There's 30 ballots are cast. Nobody's getting a majority. Grant is still heavy in the running. No winner, though. So when this would happen at conventions, they would often turn to someone, usually someone unknown. They came to be called dark horses. James Garfield was such a person. And his supporters said, okay, come on, you guys, let's start casting votes for Garfield. On the 37th ballot, Garfield won the 1880 nomination for the Republican Party. You'd come out of a convention. I mean, when I was a younger person, along with almost everybody that's watching this now, we wondered who would win at the convention. Now, today we have primaries. They count. The person that wins the primary in your state, your delegates are sworn to vote for that person. So we now have primaries. We now know who the candidate's going to be for the convention. The convention ends up, they are now basically advertisements for the party. Financial disasters after his presidency. These are personal financial disasters. Grant had no pension. Presidents didn't. They started under Eisenhower in the 1950s when a bill got passed that the president gets a pension. And in the law, they said Harry Truman will be included, even though he'd been out of the presidency for a few years. So, world tour was costly. So Grant didn't have a pension anyway. World tour was costly. That used up much of Grant's savings. Grant's friends put some money together, and in Manhattan, they bought him this house. And it's right here. It's 4 stories tall. It was for sale for $120,000 in 1881. Gigantic amount of money. The people got talked down by big businessmen who had contributed to Grant, and they sold this place for $90,000 instead of 120, which was the asking price. Today, or 2025, by inflation, $2.9 million house there. And it's at 3 East 66th Street. Here is a picture when the Grants were living there of the parlor. And Grant entered an agreement with 2 friends to build a railroad, and thought he could make some money doing that. The railroad was to be built in Mexico. So Grant approaches Chester Alan Arthur, who's president of the United States. He said, could you get rid of agreements with Mexico about tariffs and make it a free trade place? Because then Grant could move in there and build a railroad, and he wouldn't have to pay all these extra goodies and so on. Would lower the cost. So free trade agreement, but it was tried, but it didn't pass in the Senate. Grant's railroad then went bankrupt. Now Grant has a son, another option. and his son joins an investment firm. He gets his dad to invest $100,000 in the investment fund. That's about $3.2 million in 2025. Now, Grant also from William Henry Vanderbilt, one of the super wealthy industrialists that came about between the Civil War and end of the Civil War in 1900. Well, Grant gets a $150,000 loan, and he invests all of that with his son. So now he has $250,000 invested in this company where his son is working. That's $8.2 million in 2026 by inflation. And this is a picture of Vanderbilt, who gave the loan to Grant. Unfortunately, the son's company was a Ponzi scheme. You take in a whole bunch of money from a group of people. Then you get a second group of investors, and you take their money and make a huge payments to those people that were the first investors. Makes it look real good, but your money didn't make money. You paid people with some of the money. That's a Ponzi scheme. Well, Grant's son's partners, they stole the money, left the United States, and there was this involved a huge amount of money. So Grant loses all the money he has invested, which was 100,000 of his own, and 150,000 that was a loan. Vanderbilt said to Grant, "Forget about the loan. The heck with it. I don't want any money back from you." Grant said, "No, I reject your forgiveness." To repay the loan to Vanderbilt, Grant sold off his Civil War memorabilia. Pictures like this with checks that he had received, or just a letter of his down here. Guns, revolvers, swords, etc. And he was able to pay Vanderbilt back. And it was Vanderbilt who had purchased Grant's home. And then he allowed the Grants to live there free. So it was Vanderbilt primarily who bought that house. Autobiography for Grant. Grant needed more money. He wanted to provide for his wife. He was sick. He starts writing autobiography of himself. He started by writing articles for this magazine, Century Illustrated, and was paid an enormous sum, $500 per article. That's about $16,000 in 2025. I'd challenge you to find any publisher today that pays that amount of money. It's possible, but Century Magazine suggested, after several articles were published, "Why don't you write a book?" Well, he ended up writing what became two books. And Century Magazine said, "We'll give you a 10% royalty. So if this book sells for $3 in his day, you get 30 cents for each book that's sold. So you'll build up some money." Well, Grant had a very good friend who heard about this, and he called Grant and he said, "That's ridiculous." He said, "Let me handle the publication of this book or books, and I'll give you a 70% royalty. So if it sells for $3, you get $2.10 of that money." His friend, Mark Twain. The book sold 350,000 copies in the first year. Today, a book selling 15,000 copies is considered a bestseller. So this is a gigantic sales opportunity. Grant died soon after finishing the books. He never lived to see these sales. The royalties were $450,000 on 350,000 books. So you see, he was getting like $1.30 royalty on each of these books. Uh, in 2025, this is about $15 million, enough money to live your entire life on if need be. So his wife was well provided for. These books are still in print. They're still selling today. It's a total of 820 pages, has 260 images in it. On Amazon, you can buy several copies very inexpensively. But this really mint copy that you see here is $39 on Amazon in paperback. Death of Grant. Grant died on the 23rd of July, 1885, and he was 63 years old. And we've talked about him having cigars that were given to him during the Civil War. Here he is holding one. Here's a close-up of it. Here's a drawing of him smoking a cigar. Cause of his death, he didn't smoke during the Civil War, but companies would send him stuff. They wanted him to be seen in photographs, in newspapers with their product. So a cigar company gave him a box of cigars. He started smoking cigars. Photos like this were taken. He smoked cigars. And hopefully that would get more people smoking cigars. Well, he ended up with cancer as a result. A year before he died, he had a constant sore throat, and his throat was discolored, and it had these white lumps in it. That's the cancer. Funeral train for Grant traveled from Upper New York State south or kind of east to West Point, then down to New York City. And on the train route, people just standing and watching the train go by, 250,000 visitors just watching the train go by. In Manhattan, there was a funeral. His carriage with his casket in it traveled 7 miles on Manhattan streets. Visitor estimate was 1.5 million people. Here is a photograph of that carriage with his here with his casket in it. For a month, there was a state of mourning declared. He wanted to be buried at West Point, but West Point did not allow women to be buried there, and he wanted to be buried with his wife. Since his wife wasn't allowed, he refused burial at West Point. Cause of his death, again, esophageal cancer from cigars. He also ate charred meat. He liked his meat super well done, blackened on the exterior, and that also was blamed for his cancer. This was a friend, Simone Bolivar Buckner. They were at West Point together. However, Buckner became a Confederate, and he fought against Grant at the Battle of Fort Donelson, which we talked about, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he was defeated by Grant at the Battle of Fort Donelson. He visited Grant on his deathbed. They were still in communication after the war ended. When he left his visit with Grant, there was press present, and they wanted him to make a comment. And he said, "The moment of our parting was too sacred to describe." He didn't die till 1914. He was 91 years old. His son, Simone Bolivar Buckner Jr., was a lieutenant general, and to and he was commanded the 10th Army in World War II. So this is a picture of the son of a very famous friend, Simon Bolivar, to Grant. He was killed near the end of World War II at Okinawa, an island, and it was a big battle, but it's an island just off the coast of Japan. And there was an artillery shell that exploded near him, and he was killed on the 18th of June, 1945. My wife and I were married on the 18th of June, 1967. Now, this is June. In August, the war's over. So this is it's really only about 6, 7 weeks before war ends that this fellow is killed. Attendees at the funeral procession in Manhattan were the President of the United States, all cabinet members, Supreme Court, entire Supreme Court, many members of Congress. And here's a drawing of that procession. This is Walt Whitman, the poet. Walt Whitman wrote a poem about the death of Grant. As one by one withdraw the lofty actors from that great play on history's stage eternal, that lurid partial act of war and peace, of old and new contending, fought out through wrath, fears, dark dismays, and many a long suspense, all past, and since in countless graves, receding, mellowing, victors and vanquished, Lincolns and Lees, now thou with them, man of mighty days, and equal to the days, thou from the prairies, tangled and many-veined, and hard has been thy part. Excuse me, to admiration has it been enacted. A death mask was made for Grant. Many famous people had them done. Cloth, gauze-like cloth, would be placed over your face, plaster on top of that, and then removed. And this is a photograph of Grant's death mask. Grant's tomb. Tomb was built at 122nd Street near Riverside Drive. This is on the west side of Manhattan, and it's on the Hudson River. Location on the upper west side, right here. Now, this is where Grant's home was when he lived in Manhattan, down here just off of Central Park. And this is where his tomb is located. I lived maybe at 210 West 67th. I lived maybe a block and a half or so from Grant's home, but at that time, I didn't know that I could walk a block and a half and see where Grant had lived. We would rent apartments in the summer from people, and we had a friend who had a friend who owned this apartment. She was gone for 2 weeks, so we'd stay there for $40 a night instead of in a hotel for $100 a night back in the 70s, 80s. Officially, this is called the General Grant National Memorial. Here's a picture of it. Also lived just 2 blocks from this memorial in the home of a friend who was on vacation, and walked over there 2 or 3 times and had a look at it. Here's a look at the upward at the dome. Let us have peace, it says here. Here's the dome on the interior. This is a view of the caskets of Grant on the left and his wife on the right. But you can't see that because you look down at this from another floor up. Here is Grant shaking hands with Lee. They have these sorts of things. And here is a close-up of that. Here is Grant on horseback. He's famous for horses. This is a mosaic. Here's the tomb. And this actually looks like it's right next to the tomb, but it isn't. It's a block away. And it's Riverside Baptist Church. Has a heck of a spire here that you can see, and it has incredible bells that are regularly played. People gather outside that church for to listen to those bells. And it's an American Baptist church. The seminary that I went to was American Baptist. Despite that name, it's a pretty liberal group. And here's the interior of Grant's tomb. Here, you walk up to this open area. You stand at this, you look down, and this is what you see. And you can also go down and you can walk around here at the same level as these caskets. This is Grant's tomb. This is the day of its dedication when he was placed in it. And that was actually several years after he died. In the 1980s, it was in a horrible condition, the tomb. Had lots of graffiti on it. It hadn't, regular repairs had not been done by the National Park Service, who was in charge of it. And it was Ken Burns' series on Civil War that got people interested again. Visitors to Grant's tomb increased dramatically, and they saw how horrible it was. There were lots of public complaints then in the 1980s. This college student, Frank Scaturo, wrote a paper while he was at Columbia University, and he sent it out to newspapers across the country who published it, and it really advertised the horrible conditions and the needs for restoration. The Grant family then threatened to remove the bodies because why should our relative be buried in a place that's fallen apart and has graffiti on it? The Illinois state legislature releases a document, says you can bury them here. National Park Service is embarrassed. They managed to get $1.8 million and restore the tomb. Now this is 1980. This is about $5.5 million today. It's on the Hudson River, and this is Grant's tomb. This is part of it. It's known as the Hudson River Overlook. You can come down and stand in here and look at the Hudson River. And behind this is a little building, visitors center, and it has restrooms in it. Mrs. Grant said there's going to be no restrooms in this tomb. She didn't want anybody taking a crap where she and her husband were buried. So it's Grant's 175th birthday, 27 April 1997, and it's the 100th anniversary of the original dedication of the tomb, that it is rededicated. Grant evaluated. There's passive reviews about Grant, ho-hum. There's very negative reviews down on this guy. But there's been a major change of opinion that slowly has happened from 1980 to 2025, mostly due to Ron Chernow's book that was published in 2017. That was a biography of Grant. So we're going to take a look at 7 notions to consider about Grant. He saved the Union of the United States, number one. Number two, he won the Civil War. Number three, he is the most successful general in the United States history. These are comments that many people have made. The South argued that he fought to excess. That's a negative. Critics claim he was an alcoholic, and that kept his rating low. His supporters say this was greatly exaggerated. Fact is, he had migraine headaches that caused dizziness, and this probably caused lots of people to think he was drunk. Six, his presidency saw a great deal of corruption. He fought against it, but it really was pretty dramatic, the amount of bribery that went on. Item 7, his generalship was largely lucky. It wasn't based on him being a good militarist. And 8, he supported Reconstruction when he was president. He wanted blacks to have full citizenship and full rights. He wanted freed slaves to indeed be free. Rankings by historians. Let's take a look at this. 1982, he's ranked 36th of 39 presidents, places him in the bottom 10%. 1990, 37 of 40 presidents, bottom 10%. 1994, 38 of 41. I think I got that wrong. I think that's in the 9th percentile also, or 7th. Maybe not. Anyway, he's still in the bottom 10%. 2002, 2010, still in the bottom 10%. 2018, a year these evaluations were done after the publication of the Ron Chernow book, he moves up to 24th. With 45 presidencies, he's at 53.3%. He's in the top half. Now in 2022, he was ranked 21st last time that these evaluations were done. He was ranked 21st of 45 presidents, placing him at the 46.7 percentile. And that's the end. But I do have more. I got rid of some slides. I was worried about how much time this would take. So let's take a look at.
Yeah, there's time.
We got time? Okay. I'll do another, you know, 9 or 10 minutes, 8 or
Okay.
10, something like that. Good. Thank you. So let's take a look at some of the slides that I moved to the end here. And they deal with the Grant presidency, and they deal with acts that were passed during his presidency. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Coinage Act. Bimetallism. Now, this is where you use both gold and silver to back up paper currency. This was a huge debate. There were people who thought we should only be using gold. Silver is less valuable, then the money is less valuable also. And said they made coins out of these two metals then. So you get a gold, here's an 1873 gold coin. Here's an 1873 silver coin. And notice here it says half dime. This is a nickel. Grant signed a congressional bill. It stopped silver coins. It stopped the use of silver to back up money. We're going to make it only gold. So the U.S. went on to the gold standard only, which is what lots of people wanted. And the effect was it lowered inflation. Farmers were opposed to this. Now, farmers wanted more money in circulation. If you're a manufacturer, you're selling stuff year round. You have daily sales. You might have a month that's really good and other months that are even, but you've got lots of sales year round. Okay, look at farmers. They harvest a crop. That's it. They got one period of time during the entire year when they can sell their product. They can't be selling it year round like manufacturers can. Well, there's not enough money in circulation to pay for the harvest of all the crops in the United States. So what do? Well, we have to wait. Payments are delayed. Okay, we'll buy this from you, and it's September, but we can't pay it till January. So, okay, farmers had to settle for that. Uh, some farmers said, no, I want to be paid right now. And some companies thought, well, what we'll do is we'll issue corporate money, or it's kind of fake corporate money. Here's the Franklin Silk Company. Okay, they might want to buy a lot of food. They have stores where they sell their stuff along with food. Here's an American banknote company. So the farmer makes an agreement with a corporation. You give me $100 for my crop, and the corporation said, okay, here's our money. Now you can only spend that at our store. Their store had higher prices than most of the other stores where you could spend US money. So farmers were incredibly opposed to this. Ever hear of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin's a modern thing? Any comparisons or similarities? Many of these things fail. Donald Trump, the World Liberty Financial, that's a Bitcoin outfit that he owned or partially owned. His profits were at $412 million in August of 2025 and at $1 billion in April of 2026. And that's when he filed bankruptcy on it. Other investors' money lost, 75% drop in the thing. But Donald got $1 billion. Here's Fort Knox. That's where we stored gold that was backing up paper currency. Well, why would we want to do that today? Because Richard Nixon said all paper money is backed up by your confidence in the government. It's now a Federal Reserve note. It's not backed up by any precious metals. Nixon did that in 1971. It's true to this day. But guess what? In Fort Knox today, 4,581.5 tons of gold is stored there. Yikes. Tremendous amount of money, gold, and it's owned by the United States Treasury. Panic of 1873. This panic is what in the 1800s a depression is called. In 1873, it resulted in the sale of railroad bonds. So railroads wanted money. People weren't traveling and weren't sending goods like they had. So you could buy some railroad bonds. Here's a advertisement for railroad bonds. Shows you the railroad where it runs. It's called the farmer. Good investment for the farmer. And then in smaller case, mechanic, operative, laborer. Farmers would get a lot of money all at once, so they were a good group to go to because they might buy quite a chunk. Here's a railroad bond, the T. Joseph and Grand Island Railroad, and they'd give you this money. Railroads might sell a $30 bond. You'd pay $28 for it. 6 months later, you get $30 for it. So railroads use this money that came in the buying of bonds to build railroads, make more money off of things they were shipping. They'd make more money off of passengers traveling. That money then could be used to repay the $28 bond with $30 of money. Or they'd put the money in the bank at a higher interest rate. Here, these patterns look pretty much the same, but lower in value in what they gain are bonds. Here are bank interests. And this is a long period of time here during the 1800s. And you can see uh, banks are paying better than our bonds. 1873, the sale of bonds decreased dramatically, hurt railroads big time. This was a depression in 1873. It's estimated there were about 360 railroads. About 90 filed bankruptcy. That's a 25% failure rate. To solve the problem, Grant had the U.S. government buy up railroad bonds, $10 million worth. In 2025, that's $269 million. This helped resolve the crisis of the depression of that time, known as the Long Depression. How are we doing? Should I quit yet? Any questions?
We only have 5 questions at the moment, and some of those are comments. So, how long does the ferry bill take?
How long? Oh, more of this?
And
How long would it take?
yeah.
Uh, well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm willing to quit anytime. I think there's about 30 more slides, so
Okay,
quite a few. And I can come back to this to finish off the
true.
last 5 minutes or something, but
Okay.
okay.
So,
Good. Let me,
okay. Where was Grant getting his money from for his world tour and his post-presidential investments?
well, he had made a good bit of money in the military. And then he became president at $25,000 a year. And the last part of his presidency at $50,000 a year. These were gigantic amounts of money. This was $100,000 and $200,000 today. So he leaves the presidency with lots of money and takes this tour. And when he returns to the United States, he has spent a great deal of it. And that's why Vanderbilt uh, paid for the sale price on his house. And then Grant started looking for ways to make more money, which he borrowed money to invest, and that failed, as I talked about today. And then uh, he had a loan from Vanderbilt of $150,000.
Okay.
So that was after he'd returned from the trip. But no, he was a wealthy person due to the presidency alone. So
Okay. Um, someone questioned at the beginning when we were talking about the his run for president again. Is our nation on a continuous slippery slope toward losing democracy? Just a question they threw in there.
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, as a matter of fact, we've had political scientists for 40 years writing about the imperial presidency and how we do not have a balance of power anymore. How Congress has slipped, the Supreme Court has slipped. Presidents have said, let the Supreme Court enforce that ruling with their army. Of course, they don't have an army, and And there are just there are scores of books out there about how the presidency has become far more powerful, and we're losing the balance that the founding fathers wanted to exist to maintain uh, this balance of power. You know, they had three branches of government that would control each other. And basically, what you have is a president that is controlling lots of stuff, and that this has been going on since Eisenhower, or slowly advancing in that direction. So, uh, yes, are we losing democracy? And of course, there are people that say we never had one, and they call it they say since the latter third of the 1800s, it's been a corporatocracy. Corporations have been running the show. You know, they talk to congressmen, make contributions to them. There are bribes. Uh, we need to be able to deduct from our income uh, all the lunches that we have. Get a law passed for that.
Mm.
Get a law passed for this deduction, that deduction, so on and so forth. Now, there was no income tax, you know, before 1913, but there were corporate taxes before then. So a lot of people say it really goes back to the beginning of the democracy, to George Washington, and well, what were the corporations then? Thomas Jefferson owned 600 slaves. People owned 5,000-acre plantations. Um, so they had some force. But certainly in the last 50, 60 years, we've seen a decline in the power of Congress. And we hear lots of complaints today about why isn't Congress doing something? Why aren't they passing laws? Why aren't they so on and so forth? So uh, I don't know. You know, there's always been people that say we're in danger, but I think it's pretty obvious now that we have more of a imperial presidency, and there are tons of people that study this stuff and make that very complaint.
Okay, here's another question about the world tour, and then we'll get into I think we'll talk about his writing. Um, so on this world tour, they're like going, did he pay with Visa cards? Or how does it work to travel back then and pay expenses? Was he carrying a whole lot of that money with him?
Huh. Well, I've never thought about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
because
yeah. Hmm. I would think everything was cash. And then you got all the different currencies.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, you'd have to be spending a lot of time making sure you had cash and that you were converting it. And there were places that took checks. Checks existed. Uh, Usually it was rich people, and uh, why that would be allowed, like in foreign nations, I mean, I'm pretty doubtful, but I really don't know anything about how he paid for that during that period of time. You know, if he had a boat when he's traveling around the Mediterranean, I mean, he could have had a piece of luggage with cash in it. But I
Um,
don't know how the financial systems worked
okay.
in the 18.
Something to research because yeah, for us to understand travel like that today is really hard. And we can't imagine. I remember, traveler's checks. and how
Yeah.
those don't even exist now, per se. So yeah, it's definitely a different.
And it's been made easier in Europe because almost all the nations have gone to the euro. So they all have the same currency now, whereas 30 years ago, I mean, you couldn't step from one country to another without having to do some exchanging.
Mhm. So, first thing, in terms of him writing his personal memoirs to earn more money, he goes, I thought Mark Twain had to give him an advance on his autobiography because he was broke
Yeah.
at that point.
Yes, and I don't remember how much that was, but um, yeah, Mark Twain said, I'll give you an advance on this. What Twain was really doing was helping his pal. Um,
Okay. And then we have a comment that his autobiography is an easy, entertaining, and informative read that is well worth the length. And I know that it looks like in most of the library systems, there's at least one copy of this floating around in most of the library systems in the cities. If not, you can also check Libby and see if it has it. And yeah, and like you said, probably not that expensive to buy either at this point. Or read the Cherno one,
yeah.
the Ron Cherno. But I think it would be interesting to read Grant's himself. So,
Grant got very favorable reviews up to the modern day about how readable it is and how entertaining his writing was,
so
and how somebody like Grant, who never wrote anything, and then he gets into his early 60s and writes these books, and there's the gigantic discovery that he's just this wonderful writer.
um,
So,
okay. Let's see. Someone says that quite a few years ago they visited Grant's tomb. If this is you, how many years ago do you think? Excuse me.
how many years ago do I think what?
No, no, the person who wrote this, they could put this in there. And was dismayed by how seedy it was. I'm taking it that this is post 1996 or 97 when it was updated. Has anybody visited it recently? They're wondering. So if you have, you can go ahead and comment down there to let us know if things are still looking good at Grant's tomb or not.
Yeah, yeah, dedicated in 1997. That's 30 years ago. It could be rotting again, but
So, someone commenting, as for currency on his world trip, maybe they use letters of credits from his bank, which
yeah,
could.
and he may have had people in New York who made arrangements for him.
Mhm.
And they would tell a boat company, we need him to be a passenger on board your boat. And the payments were all coming from an accounting firm and all being handled in that way. So,
So,
yeah, good thing.
excuse me, just enough of allergies kicking up here to give me a cough. Um, Last question that we have at the moment is, which presidents do you currently think are most underrated today?
Hmm, underrated. Yeah, I don't that has been discussed by historians, and I hmm, I can tell you in the fall. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a name. I,
Okay.
uh, yeah, sorry.
So, no president that you kind of like that you're like, I'm always surprised that they're lower in the polls than.
Yeah. Um, Well, I'm thinking in the 1800s, and there are presidents that have never been heard of, you know. It's, yeah, I just, I don't know who I'd pick.
Okay, well, how about any overrated presidents
Oh, yeah.
in the polls? Okay.
No, I would say if you go to the Siena College, Siena, just type in Siena College and then go to their historian reviews. And that's uh, 800 historians are involved in those evaluations. They have 20 things that they rate presidents on. And, if you look through that, you can probably find somebody who you think is underrated. You can see who they rank as the worst, and you can go, gee, yeah, but he was a nice guy, something. You can really look at those evaluations, and it can be time consuming because they've got 20 different categories for
Mhm.
each president. So, but this whole topic, who's the worst? Who's the best? Who do you think? What's this and that? Be an interesting series of lectures.
Okay. Somebody wrote in, have you visited Grant's rural home near St. Louis? The museum there was very good, they said.
Oh, no, no, that he lived there because that's where his wife was from.
Hmm.
That was early on in their marriage. And no, but yeah, I've been to Galena, Illinois, and he has a home there and he worked in his father's shop. And that was after he left the military in 1854 and lived there for 7 years. And that's near us. I mean, you can drive to it. It's on the Mississippi River in northern Illinois, right. It's just a few miles from the Quad Cities. And,
Um,
yeah.
okay, it is now 2:01. So you are not doing anything in June
No,
with Ollie. You'll be back in the fall. Otherwise, let's see. Thanks
in
for
the
the great
fall.
comprehensive course, someone says.
Oh,
And
good, thanks. I
so,
In the fall I plan to do Andrew Jackson, followed by Andrew Johnson in the winter. So,
excuse me, someone just finished an Ollie class on U.S. presidents by Phil Cabort that did rank presidents. So they did look at that. Okay. So good to know. So thanks everyone for all of your questions. Thank you, JB, for sharing what you've shared. We will see everyone at some point.
it's
Um,
like the first week in October.
so okay. Otherwise, everyone have a good summer. These recordings will get up, the last two, and you can look for those on the OLLI YouTube website and the Ramsey County Library website under library program videos. So, okay, everyone have a good day.